So here's what happened. Last week the BBC aired a documentary about Gaza's children, about the tens of thousands who have either been killed or somehow survived what can only be described as a genocide. The film Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone was broadcasted initially by BBC Two, but almost immediately it was pulled from iPlayer, and that's the BBC's streaming platform. Why? Well, officially the BBC claims they only became aware after airing it that the film's young narrator, a 13-year-old Palestinian boy named Abdullah Yessouri, is the son of a former agricultural minister in Gaza. But let's be real, that's not why it was removed. The decision came after intense pressure from anti-Palestinian activists in the UK, many of whom have direct ties to the Israeli state. Now, I watched the documentary myself earlier today. It's just under an hour long and it's an incredibly powerful piece of journalism. The entire story is told from the perspective of children, kids in Gaza who lived through unimaginable horrors since October the 7th. It follows them right up to the ceasefire last month, and honestly, it's devastating. But that's exactly why it matters. It's an irony that while I'm recording this, talking about children being killed by snipers in Gaza, you can hear children playing outside and screaming from joy. Now, the narrator of this documentary, this 13-year-old kid, imagine 13 years, describes what's happening, and it's something we have seen again and again. That's Palestinians being forcibly displaced while under fire from Israeli snipers. They are simply being told their homes, their shelters and even their tents are now in closed military zones or in a danger zone, and they have to leave. The film doesn't just tell you this, it shows it in unfiltered, brutal clarity. The BBC's decision to take the film down sparked an outcry. Over 500 professionals in TV, film and media, including some pretty well-known names like sport broadcasters and former football star Gary Lineker and Harry Potter star Miriam Margolyes, signed an open letter calling the removal of the documentary politically motivated censorship. And it is. And how did the BBC respond? They put out a carefully worded statement saying there were continuing questions about the documentary and that they were conducting further due diligence with the production company. So for now, the film stays off iPlayer. But let's not pretend we don't know what's actually going on here. The BBC didn't just wake up one morning and suddenly decided, investigate this film. The decision came after a targeted smear campaign spearheaded by David Collier, a well-known anti-Palestinian blogger with connections to the Israeli former Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Collier published a blog post attacking the documentary, and then the Times of London picked it up and ran with it. And what was his argument? That Abdullah, the 13-year-old narrator, is supposedly part of what he called Hamas royalty. Of course he must be. Whatever that means, it's pure nonsense. Let's listen to a short clip that shows how BBC chief Tim Davie tries to justify the takedown. He refers to the father of the boy, which means he regurgitated uncritically the argument provided by David Collier.
I'm editor-in-chief, and if someone says, you've got a problem here, it's quite right that I go and ask the teams and say, have we got a problem? And dig into it. In this case, we got challenges.
But which organisations were
various challenges, but well, I think overall we had it depends what you call. Sorry, I'm not being evasive. I think on the log this morning there was about 500 odd complaints about the film being biased against Israel. We had about 1,800 wanted to put the film back, but then we had some serious complaints from various parts of the, establishment. We have various complaints from different people in terms of, and various organisations in terms of their concern about this programme. There were specific concerns, as you know. We've been highly transparent in my view in terms of, and that's how I try to deal with these things, in terms of saying there was a specific question around, but bear with me, around the father of the boy. And as we dug into it, we've been totally transparent. we found out that we were not told. Now, to your point, you can debate the materiality of that, you can talk about, but in my view, if you're asked a number of times and that question was not answered, and from our side, and we have fantastic teams, by the way, and I certainly think under the pressure they're under, you've got to understand some of these situations, but the level of curiosity to ask, is there anything more I know? That is basics, and at the end of the day, as editor-in-chief, I have to be secure, not only editorially where the film's at, but the making of that film. And at that point, quite quickly, I lost trust in that film.
And here's the key point. Collier's blog doesn't actually challenge a single fact in the whole documentary, not one. The film shows without embellishment Israel's systematic campaign of violence and destruction against Gaza's civilian population. And that's the real issue here. But Collier didn't stop there. He also pushed the lie that the film is Hamas propaganda. Let's unpack this for a second. If you actually watched the documentary, Abdallah, the same 13-year-old they're accusing of being a Hamas mouthpiece, reads out official Israeli military statements after every single act of Israeli violence. That's the BBC's idea of balance. They make sure that even in a documentary about Palestinian children being killed and bombed, the Israeli government gets its say. But for Collier and co., that wasn't enough. And then there is Zechariah, an 11-year-old volunteer at Al-Aqsa Hospital. He is in many ways the heart of the film. You can follow his journey as he is forced to grow up overnight, surrounded by death and destruction. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And here's a kicker. Towards the end of the documentary, the filmmaker actually asks Zechariah if he likes Hamas. Do you condemn Hamas? Remember Piers Morgan. And what does he say? I don't like them. He even says outright that they started the war. So even when the BBC bends over backward to force this artificial sense of balance into a completely unbalanced reality, it still isn't enough for Israeli supporters in the UK. They launched a full-scale attack on the film, accusing it, surprise, surprise, of anti-Semitism and demanding it be pulled. And look who led the charge. The so-called campaign against anti-Semitism, which, let's be honest, isn't really about fighting anti-Semitism, but about shielding Israeli policy from any criticism. They even staged a protest outside of the BBC, demanding the documentary's removal. Meanwhile, Palestine solidarity protesters, people who actually wanted the BBC to be held accountable for its pro-Israel bias, were banned from protesting outside of the very same building. Think about it for a second. The UK government and the BBC are actively preventing criticism of Israel, who is accused at the ICC for war crimes, while giving free rein to pro-Israel activists. You can't make this up. And look at the kind of imagery they are using. Posters depicting a Palestinian fighter with a BBC logo printed on his headband. The message is clear. They're trying to paint the BBC as some kind of terror sympathizer just for broadcasting a film about Palestinian suffering. But let's talk about David Collier for a second, the guy behind this whole campaign. He's not just some random blogger. He has a documented history of extreme anti-Palestinian rhetoric. He's called Palestinian refugees a weapon, and he's even described the Palestinian cause itself as a disease. And this is the guy whose outrage got a whole BBC documentary censored. And let's be clear, Collier isn't operating in isolation. He has been given a platform along people like Melanie Phillips, a well-known anti-Muslim commentator in the UK. The fact that his views, Collier's views, are being laundered into mainstream outlets like The Times is a perfect example how Israeli propaganda works. It starts with a fringe, far-right figure, get a mainstream paper to legitimize the claims, and suddenly the BBC is pulling the film. Now, if you want to watch the documentary for yourself, you can do so either on my X channel or on my channel on Rumble since YouTube blocked the upload. The links are in the description below. Of course, they could be taken down just as quickly, but it's out there for now. And before we wrap up, let's address one more manufactured controversy. There's been this whole uproar over the fact that Palestinians in the film refer to Israeli soldiers as Yahud. Some critics argue that because Yahud literally means Jew in Arabic, it proves that the film is anti-Semitic. But come on, context matters. I had the film watched by both native Arabic speakers and experts in Hebrew media. And this is one of the most common challenges in translation. Do you translate something literally, or do you translate it in a way that makes sense for the audience? In this case, it's obvious that when these Palestinian kids say Yahud, they are talking about Israeli soldiers, the very people shooting and killing them. It's not a slur, it's not anti-Semitism, it's how they describe their occupier, it's how they describe their own reality. And let's not forget, Israel calls itself a Jewish state. The Israeli government insists that its actions represent Jews worldwide. So when Palestinian children who have only ever known Israeli bombs, Israeli soldiers, Israeli snipers and Israeli checkpoints use the word Yahud, they're describing the only reality they've ever seen. This entire debate is just another distraction. It's another bad faith argument designed, consciously, purposeful and strategically designed to shift attention, your attention, away from what actually happens. The mass killing and displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. And here's the bottom line. None of the critics attacking this film are actually disputing what it shows. Nobody is disputing any of the facts that you see in the movie. They just don't want you to see it. What they do want you to see is Trump Gaza, a perverted reality in which 2 million lives are simply pushed aside. Will we all allow this to happen? Will you allow this to happen?
Donald is coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1.
Over and out.